guys, I'm Angie. Welcome to my channel. So today we're going to be doing my September and October wrap up. Normally I would do these month by month, but I had a pretty low reading month in October, so I thought I may as well combine it with September so that we have a little bit more to talk about today. So like I said, I had a pretty low reading month, at least for me. In October I read 4 books, but in September I had a pretty good reading month and I read 10 books. So together we'll be talking about 14. And I think that this wrap up is particularly interesting because at the beginning of September I really felt like I was coming out of this reading slump that I had kind of been in honestly all year, and I really just loved all of the books I was reading. I was reading so much. I really wanted to read all the time, but now at the end of October I feel like I'm in a whole new reading slump that's like way worse than the one before, which is just not fun at all. So I definitely think somewhere in this wrap up maybe we can kind of see where I fell into this reading slump. I feel like I have an idea of maybe which book it was, but I'm really not sure. The only place I can go from here is I can just hope that November and December are much better reading months, that I just kind of like get back into the groove of things and really fall back in love with reading, because that's really all I could ask for. Let's go ahead and get started with the wrap up. Most of the books were consumed on Kindle. I think I have like maybe a couple of audiobooks, but of the books that I did have physical copies for, I have them right here. So I will hold those up when the time comes. First book that I read in September, I actually finished on September 1st, and that book was Lost in the Wild by Cassie. This is like a silly little romance novella. I actually picked it up at the very end of August because I really wanted to read 10 books that month, but obviously that didn't happen. So I finished it on the first day of September. Lost in the Wild is a little romance novella, and it follows a woman who goes into the woods because she is on an assignment for this like paper she works at or something. She goes into the woods in search of a man that lives in the wilderness. The romance is between her and said wild man. There's honestly not too much to say about this book. I mean, I don't think it was really made to be memorable or anything like that. It's pretty short and it's pretty smutty. I wouldn't say that it's actually allspice. I don't actually remember that being the case. What I do remember is before the FMC knew the MMC's name, she would just address him as wild man. Like she'd be like, "Come here, wild man. Go away, wild man." And I thought that was really funny. The book actually wasn't that bad. I actually kind of would recommend it if you are someone that likes to read romance novellas like this. If you're looking for something that's maybe just like a little bit wacky, but not too cringy, honestly. It really wasn't that bad. I think I gave it like 3 stars, which isn't a bad rating for a book like this. I tend to gravitate towards Cassie when I'm looking for a romance novella to kind of either put in between longer books or if I'm trying to read a bigger number of books for whatever reason, and I will continue to do so after this book. The next book that I read in September was The Pumpkin Spice Cafe by Laurie Gilmore. This book is really making its rounds on TikTok, and I think maybe in other book communities as well. I see it a lot on TikTok for sure. People were definitely recommending it a lot in September and October. I don't know if that's going to continue with November. I mean, I think it still fits. Obviously, people are looking for those fall vibes with this book. I mean, the author's name is literally Laurie Gilmore, which I feel like is a little too on the nose for me personally. Pumpkin Spice Cafe is literally a Hallmark movie in a book. The premise of the book is our main character moves from the big city to a small town because she inherits a cafe from her aunt. I really don't think you can get any more Hallmark than that. It is a romance book. It is a romance between her and the grumpy local farmer. But honestly, for me, I didn't love this book, even though, like I said, it is a romance book. It's not a cozy mystery like a lot of people seem to think it is. But the romance was kind of boring. And honestly, I really did not like the love interest. I did not like that man at all. I thought he was so annoying. And I've always thought that I have a pretty high tolerance to annoying characters in books, but apparently not high enough for this man. I really did not like this man. I just did not like him. Even though it's not a cozy mystery, there was a mysterious subplot, I guess, but it was so uninteresting and so easy to figure out. I feel like I figured it out within the first, as soon as it was introduced, I feel like I already knew what was happening, which I am not a big mystery reader, but I imagine that you want a mystery that's interesting and one that is, you know, that kind of keeps you on your toes. This did not deliver that. Yes, it did deliver those fall vibes. I mean, pumpkins are definitely mentioned. I don't know if that was really enough to kind of compensate for this book's faults. I think I might be in the minority here. I do think a lot of people do like this book. I hear mixed things. So if this is a book that you really wanted to check out, or if you already own the book, don't let me stop you. You know, books are so subjective, and I'm never going to dissuade anyone from picking up any book. Then I read Finrose Forever by Stephanie Archer. This is the last book in the Queen's Cove series, or maybe the most recent. She said that she might write more, but as of right now, it is the last book in the series. I've been reading the Queen's Cove series over the past couple of months or so, and I've been really enjoying it. I would definitely say it's probably one of my favorite romance book series, definitely this year, but maybe in general. Sorry if you can hear that bird out there. It won't shut up. It is early morning, so you know they're getting their calls in. Finrose Forever isn't my favorite book in the series, that's for sure, but I definitely know that I still enjoyed it. Finrose Forever follows Finn Rhodes, obviously, and Olivia, whose last name I cannot remember right now. They were like inseparable childhood best friends, and then that relationship slowly became more romantic as they got older and into high school. But Finn just completely broke Olivia's heart at the end of high school. She has not forgiven that man. Let me tell you, she hates that man. You can't talk to Olivia about Finn. You can't mention Finn around her. Like, she does not like that man at all. But even though that she hates him, they were so connected in childhood and in their like teenage years that they're still often referenced together and stuff like that. Olivia's just in a bad place because even though she hates this man, he's still constantly mentioned around her. But I guess luckily for her, Finn actually did move away a few years ago, and he's living, I think, in Whistler. The series is set in Canada, so she doesn't actually have to see him that often. But of course, that has to change for this story to progress. So he does move back to Queen's Cove, which is the series name, but also the town that this series is set in. Basically, when he is in Whistler, he has this moment where he realizes that if his life were to stay the way that it is, he's going to be a deadbeat. Like, there's no doubt about it. Like, you know, he has no important relationships in his life. He decides to move back to Queen's Cove, and his number one mission is to have Olivia forgive him. I don't remember if at first his intentions were completely platonic or not, or romantic, but the point is he wanted to mend this rift with Olivia. Olivia's obviously not interested in Finn, at least she doesn't want to be, because she's still super, super upset with him, but Finn does a pretty good job of inserting himself in her life. She's currently working at the local town bar that's owned by her family, which is actually a setting that we return to quite a bit in the series, so it's kind of fun to be behind the scenes in this book. And on top of that, she's also a grad student, and her thesis, or at least I think that is what it's called. I don't remember specifically what she called it, and I don't know if it's called something else in Canada, but the American equivalent would be a thesis. And she's basically trying to prove that there is a certain flower that blooms in this area of Queen's Cove at a different time of the year than originally believed, because she and Finn saw it at a weird time of the year several years in the past, and she remembers that and she knows that she can prove it. But to prove that, she has to go hiking a bunch. Things happen, and now Finn has to go hiking with her, obviously. And with that added forced proximity, the relationship and the story really progresses from there. I think what's really interesting about this book is Stephanie Archer herself, in her author's note, said that she wanted to approach the fated mates trope in this contemporary setting. And I do think she really succeeded in that. You can tell that Finn and Olivia are meant to be together, and they always have been, which is like why they immediately gravitated towards each other as children. And even though they maybe felt a little bit inevitable, it was still really sweet to see their story and their relationship progress. And like I said, I did like this book. I know that it was really good, but I do think my overall opinion and maybe my rating was affected by the fact that it took me quite a while to finish this book. This isn't the only time that I experienced this in this kind of like wrap up within these couple of months, but I took so long to finish this book. I think like a little bit over a week, which for me is quite a while. And I feel like when I take too long to read a book, it really takes me out of the story. I don't know if it's because I like forget what happens, or if I kind of lose momentum, or what it is. I never connect with a story that takes me a while to read as much as I do with a book that I read maybe in a couple of days or so. So I think because of that, I maybe have a little bit of a disconnect with this book. And I think if I had read it a little bit faster, I think I actually would have liked it more. The next book that I read was Bull Moon Rising by Ruby Dixon. This is Ruby Dixon's newest book. I was actually super lucky to read it as an ARC. I really enjoyed it. This book is so different to everything that I've read from Ruby Dixon in the past. Obviously, I'm pretty familiar with her through Ice Planet Barbarians and like a couple other series here and there. But this book really just read so differently. This book read like a high fantasy book mixed with a little bit of monster romance, mixed with even a little bit of historical romance. But it still did have Ruby's like fun and at times comedic writing. Bull Moon Rising follows Aspith as she leaves her countryside estate home to move to the big city. She is moving to the big city to join what is called the Royal Artifactual Guild. And the Guild is an organization that searches these ruins that are beneath the city, and they're searching for artifacts that are definitely magical, but they also range from super expensive artifacts to pretty worthless ones. Her family is not doing so well, so she's hoping that if she finds one of these really pricey artifacts, she will be able to take it back home and kind of help her family situation. To join the guild, she has to become what is essentially a training group. I believe it is like 5 people, and it just so happens that the person in charge of training her training group is this sexy minotaur named Hawk. And Hawk is actually in a little bit of a dilemma himself. There's this event coming up called the Conquest Moon, and the Conquest Moon essentially sends all of the minotaurs into a rut. So this is maybe where a little bit of prior knowledge of monster romance could be helpful. There is this rut that is upcoming, and he doesn't want to spend it with strangers, so he kind of doesn't know what to do. And Aspith finds out about this, and like I said, there's a little bit of historical romance. So she needs a chaperone to join the guild. She finds out about Hawk's situation, so she approaches him and says, hey, I will help you through the rut if you are my chaperone and help me join the guild. And he agrees. And then the story really does go from there. We do get quite a few training montages. We do learn a lot about the guild and these ruins that are beneath the city. And then obviously there's some development in Hawk and Aspith's relationship. And, you know, maybe they find out that this marriage isn't just convenient. As weird as this might sound, my favorite thing about this book was actually the author's note. Not to say that the book itself was bad or anything like that, but the author's note really showed all the different places that Ruby Dixon got her inspiration from, which was just really cool to see. She cites things like Stardew Valley, the mines in that game if you've ever played, talks about like different archaeological documentaries. She talks about something called the Royal Geographical Guild or something like that, some real guild, some real society like that. She also talks about the Sherpas on Everest. It was just really interesting to see where she got all of her inspiration for this world, because I genuinely think it was a very, very cool world and just a very unique story. And of course, I'm not like a huge fantasy reader or anything like that, but it was never like anything I read before. So I thought it was pretty cool. I just love Ruby Dixon for getting Minotaur romance traditionally published. The next book that I read was Happy Place by Emily Henry. I love Emily Henry, and that did not change with this book. I really, really liked Happy Place. I know that it's not everyone's favorite book, but I really connected with it and I really liked it. If you didn't know, Happy Place is Emily Henry's second most recent adult romance, and it is a second chance romance. It's a second chance romance between Harriet and Wynne, who have been together for a really long time. I think something like 8 years. Like, they've been together a while. They've broken up, but they haven't told their friends because they're worried that it's like going to change this dynamic that their friend group has, and that friend group is really important to them. It really isn't working out for them because they both end up going to Maine to stay at their friend's house like they do every summer, but their friends still think that they're together. You know, they have to pretend that they are still together. Like I said, I really enjoyed this book. I liked the second chance romance. I liked the cast of characters that Emily Henry made. I also really liked Wynne as a character as well. I could definitely see why some people might not like it. Like, there's definitely certain things that I could see why they frustrate people. I still liked it. I had so much fun reading it, and I definitely did worry that the reason I liked it so much is because it had been a couple of years since I'd read an Emily Henry book, and maybe I was just super excited to be back in one of her worlds. But I still feel this way over a month later, so I think it's safe to say that I did genuinely like this book. Oh my god, I forgot to hold the book. Here's a book that I meant to hold up. And then you can see I even tapped it, which is not something I actually do that often. I want to get better about tapping more. The next two books I'm going to talk about together because I think that just makes the most sense. And those books are The Cruel Dark and Lover by B. Northwick. And I'm going to talk about them at the same time because Lover is literally the same book, just talked about from the MMC's perspective. The Cruel Dark is a really fun gothic book that follows a woman who is scouted at her job to work at this estate that is like a couple hours from Boston. And she's scouted to work as an assistant to this professor that lives there. And she agrees because, one, the pay is like unbelievably good, and two, she's also kind of trying to find herself. She recently woke up in a psychiatric hospital with no recollection of who she was or just any memory of anything, at least within the last couple of years. So she's just been working at this bookstore with no idea what's going on. And so she gets to the house. House is kind of in disrepair because the owner of the home, this sexy professor that she's working for, is really down because of the death of his wife. But because of that, we have this like amazing gothic, almost at times like dangerous setting. And there's definitely like some spooky moments because of the house. At times it feels like a little paranormal. It's very fun and very interesting. The professors kind of standoffish at first, but we do see them warm up to each other, and it is honestly really sweet to see how their relationship progresses. My biggest complaint, and honestly maybe it's kind of significant, is just that these books were way too short. The Cruel Dark I think is 250 pages, and then Lover is 150, and it is just not enough time to really get to know our couple, not enough to get to know them as individuals. We just needed like more time in this world, but unfortunately we didn't get that. I think if you're looking for a short gothic read, I do think that you would like this. The next book that I read was The Last Thing He Told Me by Lord Dave. The Last Thing He Told Me was a book that I read. It's a thriller book, which is obviously not my go-to genre. Or maybe it was mystery. I would actually say it's more of a mystery. We're definitely trying to find something out here. And that thing is the disappearance of this woman's husband. He doesn't come home from work one day, which maybe isn't all that surprising. You know, maybe he was working late or something like that. But he doesn't show up to take his daughter to one of her like after school activities. And so that's when the main character kind of starts to wonder like what's going on. And then I don't remember if it was the same day or the next day, but this little boy comes up to her door with a letter from her husband saying something like protect her, alluding to his daughter. That's weird, right? Like that's really weird because he hasn't called at all. And then also, in addition to all of this, his company is on the news because there's like some fraud going on. The CEO is like arrested. There's just like a lot going on, right? So obviously we're all thinking that he's guilty, but the wife is not convinced because, you know, she knows her husband or whatever. And that really sends her down a rabbit hole of a bunch of different clues. She's following clue after clue to kind of just figure out what's going on. And this is okay. I don't even know if I like this genre yet, honestly. I keep reading thriller and mystery books. I've read a handful this year. I've yet to find anything that is like a 5-star thriller or mystery. I don't even know what that would look like for me, honestly, but I know it wasn't this. I was pretty invested while I was reading it or I was listening to it, but like by the end, I was kind of done with it. And then definitely since I finished the book, I question whether or not I even liked it. And also, if you've read the book, I just couldn't believe that anyone could be this selfless. I don't know, maybe that makes me selfish, but that's how I felt when I was reading the ending of this book. I'm gonna remember to pick up this book. And then the next book I read in September was Bride by Ali Hazelwood. I am now one book closer to having read all of Ali Hazelwood's backlist. I think I'm like 2 books away. I went into this book definitely thinking I was going to love it because I love paranormal romance and I generally like Ali Hazelwood's newer books at least. And I already know what Nodding is, so I didn't need an introduction to that. So that made things a little bit easier for sure. But it was honestly just okay. To me, it wasn't anything special as someone that has read other shifter books and other paranormal romances. It also kind of made me realize that I think all of the people that are really raving about this maybe aren't as familiar with the genre, so to them it was like something cool and new and special. I'm not saying it's not special in its own right, I guess, but I don't think it's necessarily better than maybe another paranormal romance that I could have picked up, if you know what I mean. And also actually it was pretty forgettable for me. I'm starting to realize that I have this issue with Ali Hazelwood books where I just forget everything that happens in them. I have no idea what happened in this book, but I do remember like the general setup, and the setup is that Misery, our vampire, has to marry Lo, our werewolf, and they're doing so for political reasons. So they're set up to kind of help with almost like a truce between these two peoples. Misery is doing it because she is looking for her friend who has gone missing, and Lo does it because he is the alpha, so I think he kind of feels like he has to. There's definitely a lot of like species politics in this, and it was also pretty hot. That I do remember. I enjoyed the spice in here quite a bit, so it honestly just made me more excited to read Not in Love, which is Ali Hazelwood's most recent book and apparently her spiciest. So yeah, that's what I got from this book. And then the last book that I read in September was Phantasma by Kaylie Smith. Phantasma is like BookTok's favorite book right now, so you know I had to check it out for myself. Phantasma promises like this deadly game set in a gothic mansion, and I do think it delivers that. It's set in New Orleans, which is definitely my favorite part about this book. I really need to read more books that are set in New Orleans, especially fantasy books. I really think New Orleans is a perfect setting for a fantasy novel. The main character's name is Ophelia, and she is a necromancer from a family of necromancers. Her mother dies at the very beginning of this book, and that's when she really has to face her future as the head of the family and like the head necromancer of the family. But it turns out it's not all that simple, because right after her mother dies, the bank comes knocking on their door and is like, hey, your mom took out a loan and now we need your house to pay for this loan. I think it was a loan. Basically, her family is in debt. And this is a complete surprise to Ophelia. She had no idea that the family was struggling at all, but it is not a surprise to her sister, Genevieve. And because Genevieve kind of feels like she has to fix the situation, she joins this tournament that comes to town called Phantasma. Phantasma is a game that is run by demons and travels from town to town, kind of collecting its victims. And the reason people join the game, even though it is this like deadly game, people join it because if you win the game, you basically get your greatest wish answered. You can have any wish answered, or like, I think you can make like any kind of bargain. Basically, you tell the demons what you want and you will get that. So you can definitely see why Genevieve wanted to join. Ophelia does not like this at all though. She, one, does not like that her sister kept all these secrets from her, and two, that she joined this deadly game. So she naturally goes after her to try to stop her, but she's a little too late and ends up joining herself. Phantasma, the game, is based on the 7 circles of hell or something like that. There's like a lust level and a greed level, but I think those are the deadly sins, so I don't know. It's a cool setup, basically. She meets a ghost there that offers to help her win if she helps him kind of figure out why he's stuck in Phantasma and like who he is. You can kind of think of him as like a sexy Danny Phantom. I understand why so many people like this. It definitely is a lot of fun, but my biggest complaint is that it was too spicy. There was too much smut going on, which is weird of me to say because I do like spice. There's some fun stuff going on, so like, where are we stopping to bang? You know what I mean? Like, I wanted a little bit less of that, a little bit more of the plot, a little bit more of the game. And honestly, the game kind of felt too easy at times, especially for Ophelia. Honestly, for everyone. I felt like it wasn't that hard for a lot of them. I've heard that this book is actually pretty similar to Caravel, so maybe I will check that out to see how it compares. And now we're in October finally, so there's only 4 books left to talk about, and the first one that I read that month was Jack by Layla Faye. I can't believe I have to talk about this book. I made a huge list of Halloween novellas to read, and I only read like 2 of them, so I didn't really succeed in that, but this was the first one that I chose to read. And I think you can guess kind of like how wild it is from the cover. It's about a woman summoning a lover on Halloween, and that lover just happens to be a jack-o'-lantern. This is literally just erotica. Like, there's really nothing else to it, and it's pretty wacky at times too, but this obviously has its audience. I mean, I read this book. I love wacky novellas like this. I think that they're so fun and so funny, and they're really good conversation starters as well. And if this sounds like something you might want to pick up, something that could either sell you on the book or make you not want to read it at all is that his, tastes like pumpkin spice, which is just like a funny little tidbit that this author added in. Also, this book does have a happy ending. I was a little worried while I was reading it just because of how the book is set up, but there is a happy ending. And also the ending is wild. Let me grab my book. And then I read Magnolia Parks by Jessa Hastings. I do think this is where my book slump started. I really do. Magnolia Parks is technically a second chance romance, but I do struggle to call it a romance because the romance shown I don't think is one you really want to strive for. Magnolia Parks follows Magnolia Parks, obviously, and BJ Valentine. And Magnolia and BJ also kind of have this fated mates vibe. You can tell that they kind of belong with each other. You definitely can tell that they only want to be with each other, but they can't be together because BJ completely broke Magnolia's heart a couple of years ago. She hasn't really forgiven him for it. So now they're just like in this cycle of Magnolia kind of fake dating a bunch of guys and BJ sleeping with a bunch of girls. So it definitely led to this cycle, like I said, where right when you thought that maybe they'd get back together, something would fuck up and they'd be right back at the beginning, which definitely got a little bit frustrating to read at times. But at the same time, I can't say that I completely hated this book. I definitely understand the appeal, but at the same time, I was reading this for a YouTube video. I was going to read the first 3 books in this series, and I can't say for sure that if I wasn't reading these books for that, if I would have actually finished it. I think I may have DNF'd it if I was just like reading it on my own time. I ended up putting down the 3rd book and not DNFing it. I do plan on finishing it, but I put it down a couple weeks ago and I haven't picked it back up. And these books are also just kind of dense, at least for me. They kind of felt like a little bit of a slog to get through. Again, a lot of people love these books, so maybe don't take my word for it. But I can say that I do think that the more time that passes, the less that I like this book, which is unfortunate. But then the next book that I read was, of course, Daisy Haites by Jessa Hastings, and I like this book a lot more actually. Daisy Haites follows different characters. It follows Daisy Haites, obviously, her brother Julian, and Christian Hems, who is a character that we saw in Magnolia Parks as well. Daisy and Christian are kind of in this romantic situation of some kind. They're not really together, but they're together at the same time. And this book also follows the same timeline as Magnolia Parks. So these two stories are happening at the same time. And Daisy's brother Julian is the head of this gang that is involved in stealing art. That seems to be their primary thing. And while Daisy's not directly involved with it, she's obviously still in the world just because she is Julian's sister. And she actually doesn't really even approve of a lot of the things that they do, but still that crime element really does add a lot to the plot. It does make things a little bit more interesting. And I just really like this story a lot more. I like Daisy a lot. I found her to be much more down to earth than Magnolia, though I do think Magnolia is written like that on purpose. And I also really liked her and Christian together. I was really rooting for them to get together, which I didn't find myself doing for Magnolia and BJ at times. Still planning on continuing the series. At least I'm going to finish the third book, which is Magnolia Parks: The Long Way Home, which again follows Magnolia and BJ, which I think is why I put it down. But if I were to continue after that, it would be another Daisy Haites book, so I might pick that up as well. And then finally, the last book that I read in October and the last book in this wrap up was Spookily Yours by Jennifer Chipman. This is another one of the books that was on my little list of Halloween novellas. I mean, it wasn't that little, it was a pretty long list, but this is another novella. Picked it up because it was part of that list, but also because I went to Love in Vegas and she was one of the authors that was there. And this book was cute. I don't think it's anything I'm going to be raving about for like years to come or anything like that. It's a cute little Halloween novella and it did its job. Spookily Yours follows a witch named Willow, and she goes to the animal shelter to adopt a cat in hopes that that cat will become her familiar. But it turns out that the cat that she adopts is actually a demon stuck in its shifted form. And the demon shifted form is a black cat. The demon's name is Damien, of course. Willow helps him get out of his shifted form and, you know, they fall in love. It's a romance book. It was also actually fairly spicy, which I don't think you would like expect from this novella. And there's at times where it was like even a little bit kinky. It was like pretty spicy, actually. I don't really have anything to say about this book. I mean, if you're looking for a cute little Halloween novella, this will do the job for you. It's cute and sweet and spicy. So those are all of the books that I read in September and October. Like I said, it was an interesting couple of reading months for me. And you can really tell that I really just like, and like October was just like not a good reading month for me, which is fine. You know, 4 books is still a lot of books to read in my opinion. But I'm definitely hoping that the end of the year is a bit better in terms of my reading. I really just want to get back into reading whatever the hell I want to read. I think I was putting a lot of pressure on myself to 1, read Magnolia Parks, and then 2, kind of read books from authors that were going to be at Love in Vegas, and I don't like that added pressure. So that's where we ended up. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you have a good day, a good week, a good everything. I will talk to you guys later. Bye.